then it was bank robberies and heists, then it was money coming in from the US.
Yes.
And then in the later days, it came from FARC in Colombia in exchange for training rebels down in Colombia. It was cocaine money. And then it was also coming from Libya, from Gaddafi. So it was people who were sympathetic to the IRA cause and didn't like the British, was kind of the, and I'd say above
my
all...
enemy is your enemy kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, there was, they made the most of what came in. When the sniper rifles came in, they became pretty ferocious at sniping British soldiers. And it became, there were some parts of Northern Ireland where soldiers couldn't even walk. Bandit country, South Armagh, they'd have to fly everywhere because for risk of car bombs and for risk of sniping attacks.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Today we're going to talk to somebody who I'm very, very interested in talking to myself, because as it happens, I'm a fan of his. And this is Mr. Oisín Feeney of the Troubles podcast. Very cool podcast that deals with the history of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, which is what he's going to tell us about today. Of course, today he's just going to give us a very brief overview, but if you have any interest in this, please follow up with him on his podcast, The Troubles. No more nonsense. Let's get with the interview. Hey, Oisín, how you doing, my friend?
Not so bad. How are you keeping?
Good, very good. I'm so glad we finally got together, unbeknownst to our listeners here. We had a little back and forth to make this happen today. But
yeah, it took a little bit of a while, but we got there. I think both of us get the email and then it goes in the long finger, and then I always forget. I have a tendency to forget to reply to a lot of things. So fair play for following up.
Yeah, we're here. And today you're going to give our listeners a little history lesson in the Troubles. All right, the Irish Troubles, which for the most part, it's not exactly, but ran from about 69 to about 98. Correct?
Yeah, they're in thereabouts. Yeah.
Right. But before we do that, what I'd like to do is just, again, introduce you, okay? My friend Oisín Feeney, all right, who has the Troubles podcast, which I am very much a fan of, as we talked about before, all right? So I'm excited to meet you as a fan. I'd like to say I listened to every one of your episodes. However, I know I've done that thing where when I first started, I was probably, I don't know, maybe 30 episodes in, and unfortunately did not start with episode 1. So everybody that starts listening to this, start at 1 and work your way up, because I bounced all over the place.
Well, that's how I designed it. So you see, because I found it really a pain in the ass. Say hey, look, here's the British History podcast, and there's 600 episodes, and you're like, oh God. Sometimes I find it intimidating to have to go all the way back to number 1. So I designed each episode to be kind of open, closed. Jump in whenever you want, jump in anywhere. And you don't need, but if you listen to the latest episode, you're not going to have to listen to the past. Now, I'd like it to. It'd be nice if you did, and I'm sure you get into it. But it's designed in a way that you don't have to be building with your knowledge. It's just, here is one episode, and I'll explain it from the 0 to 100.
And I think I know exactly what you're saying, and I agree 100% that they're all, self-contained episodes.
Yeah, and in no order, all over the place.
My mistake was those because I didn't start at the beginning and work my way towards the end. I don't know which ones I've missed.
Oh, okay.
So, let's say if I started at 30 and then listened to 50, but I went back to 20 and then I jumped to 70 and then I went back to 15. Yeah. And I'm like, I have no idea which ones I've missed or haven't missed or haven't listened to. And it's a shame because I love them all. And I learned something with everyone too. I think that I really did a good job with it, man. You really do.
That's the intention anyway.
Yeah. Also, for our listeners, something that I like to point out is something I really appreciate about you and the Troubles podcast, and what you've taught me, I guess, is especially being an American and growing up in New York, in not a predominantly Irish, a very Irish neighborhood, being in a New York City Police Department with so many, many Irish, we all have an idea of what the Troubles were about, okay? But you present them in a non-political manner, a nonpartisan manner that I really appreciate, and you show all the different sides and interview people from all the different sides. You interview not only the Republicans or IRA members, but you also interview loyalists and British people.
Well, so far I've managed to get soldiers on, but it's difficult. It's been kind of tough to get loyalists on. So ex kind of loyalists paramilitaries.
Okay.
They can be a little bit tough. I'm working on it, but they're just a little bit more difficult to.
Well, hopefully, if anybody
So,
listens to this thing, they'll give you a call
yeah,
because
well, that's the objective. I just want, like, I've never been the most politically motivated individual. I love history. I love true crime. I was obsessed with Case File, if you know Case File, the Australian.
Mhm.
But like for me, I find my style of like talking about crime, I didn't really want to be like, hey, let's get drunk and talk about true crime. I was like, no, I'm going to put this out exactly as it is, monotone or very, very down the middle. I'm going to focus on the victims and I'm going to let the listener come to their own conclusions. That's what I want. So,
yes,
yeah, I'm very conscientious of trying to make sure, because my name is Oisín Feeney, which is the most Irish sounding name in the world.
yes,
So automatically people might dismiss it as biased.
right.
So, yeah, it's just a matter of trying to kind of put it out as a kind of like a historical record, even though I probably am an expert in this field. I guess I've become one by all the research I've done. But I
Well,
didn't come into this,
you've self-educated yourself by
Yeah,
doing all
exactly.
these episodes, and you've
Yeah.
learned, and you've actually spoken. Not to knock any college professors who are teaching this stuff, all right, but I would bet dollars to donuts that you, my friend, have more first-hand knowledge than any of these guys that learned it in college.
Well, hopefully, and hopefully
I
I
mean,
just want to keep
by
collecting it as well. Yeah.
actually talking to people that live.
Yeah, it's a weird one. It really is. Like the strangest was when, I go into a man's house and his wife makes me a cup of tea, and then
Mhm.
we sit down in the other room and he's like, "Okay, do you want to hear about the worst 7 days of my life when I was tortured by the British Army?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, I guess here we go." And that's a weird sensation. I was like, "Who am I to be receiving that here?" Anyway, sorry, we're getting a little bit sidetracked. So yeah, that's my name is Oisín. I'm a podcaster. I've been running this podcast for 4 years, 5 years now. Before that, I worked as like a hiking guide over in Italy.
Mhm.
And yeah, I've kind of been all over the place. I've worked a load of jobs, but I always wanted to make a podcast.
Yeah.
And I always liked true crime. And then I learned about the assassination of Lord Mountbatten, who's this
Yes.
famous British royal that the IRA blew up. Um, and there was just a lot of really interesting kind of like his backstory, because he's the man who partitioned India and he did it very badly.
Mhm.
And then the plot to kill him, how it was carried out, the investigation. And then for me, what I find really interesting is the ethical situation, because the IRA knew that they were going to kill children by using this bomb to kill
Yes.
Mountbatten. And they deemed the children a worthy sacrifice.
Mhm.
And that's why people in the Republic of Ireland, many of them will never support the IRA or Sinn Féin, because they think the IRA's toll to get these people was too much. It was too heavy.
Well, that's the one problem that I've always had is, I guess, again, with the Republican movement or the IRA movement, was that I see a terrorist as a terrorist. I don't care. None of this, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I have no problem with going to war for a just cause. Okay.
I'm
And
listening,
I'm
so I keep
certainly
going. Not just a funny one. Sorry, my current read, one man's terrorist.
oh, yes. There you go.
So
So, what was I going to say? But the killing of innocents, okay, is something that I could never abide with, and
yeah, it's a big
so
one.
if you choose somebody that you need to assassinate, you believe you need to assassinate them is one thing, but to set off a bomb that you have no idea who you're going to kill, when you hear,
Yeah,
and
well, you
both
see a
sides
lot.
did this, as we know, when we get into it, both sides, this was common practice in the bombings, and I could never fathom killing innocent people that had no skin in the game.
Yeah, and a lot of the times then there'd be, an apology, and then the IRA would make a statement blaming the security forces for not evacuating properly. And,
Yes.
I find that it's very difficult to plant the bomb and then blame the people, blame the people who planted the bomb. Don't blame the people who didn't
Yes.
evacuate in time.
Yes.
Or, in the case of the Oma bombing, they wanted to bomb the courthouse, and they placed the bomb car like maybe 200 yards away. So they call in the warning, says there's one of these cars is a bomb. So the police start evacuating people down the street into the bomb blast zone, because they didn't know where the car bomb was. So these sort of things, like, it's very, again, a lot of people would say they're unjustifiable. It's a hard pill to swallow, I think.
Oh, well, it is for me, personally. And it's not that I'm completely unsympathetic to the cause, or the idea of the cause, I guess I should say. Although so much of it I am still very ignorant on, I could never, again, justify the killing of innocents regardless. And I know, when we can put the word war on it, but it is a war within your own nation against your own people. And I know it's not. I'm greatly simplifying it there. But the idea that setting off a bomb that could kill a woman walking by with her children who had nothing to do with anything political is just heartbreaking to me.
Yeah, it's a shame.
As opposed to an outright assassination, which I can understand and, for lack of a better word, get behind. I don't know if I want to say that, but you understand it. I can understand, look, this guy's got to go. It's business. We're going to take care of him. I can understand that. But I can't understand randomly killing strangers at all.
Yeah. So again, it's funny because like in the, we love the IRA as Irish people. Again, I'm a fiercely proud Irish person. I love my Irish heritage. I love being Irish. I love what it means to be Irish. But like, say, we love the paramilitaries of the 1916 rebellion 100 years ago.
Yes.
And they have kind of a hero status because they're the ones who fought and died for Ireland. But at the same time, in a way, there are often comparisons against those men and women and the paramilitaries then in the 70s, who they feel like they're in the same vein, but at the same time, it's very different. One can be worshipped as the saviors of our nation and all that sort of stuff. But the more recent paramilitaries, it's definitely a lot murkier. It's very, it's a comparison that is often made, but it's a hard comparison, I think, to comprehend,
Well, that's something too that I'd like actually to explain to our listeners a little bit is, so the whole, and again, if I'm wrong, please correct me with everything, but just things that I understand. A funny thing that I had learned years ago, but I know the Fenian movement, as we know it today, where we are, actually started in America in like the 1840s or so. Okay.
Yeah.
In the 1860s came the here in America again was the Irish Brotherhood, because we had so many Irish that were coming here.
Yeah, the IRB. Right. Yeah.
And I think they discovered their freedom here and were like, hell yeah, we like this, let's bring it home. In fact, in the 1860s, the Irish Brotherhood, again, and I may be wrong saying it's the precursor to the IRA, but it was a strong organization, actually raided Canada several times. They would go into Canada and raid the British and then run back into America.
They stole a submarine.
Yeah, so, amazing stuff.
Yeah, the inventor of the modern submarine was Irish. Philip Holland, I think his name was. What's his name? And the IRB stole it, and then they didn't know how to drive it, and it sank.
Just terrific. These stories. There's so many stories we could talk for hours and hours about it. But then,
how about this? Let's what if I kind of just do a very, very basic primer on the island of Ireland and how England came to be in Ireland, or the British government, or whatever. And just to preface this, folks, like for anyone listening, be very wary with the dates that I say. I'm really bad at all of these sort of dates, so I'm kind of just going to give a general overview and take every date with a little bit of a pinch of salt. But the overall, story, history is there, if that makes sense. So yeah, so Ireland, back in back a long time ago, was just a lot of different kingdoms and fiefdoms. There was no notion of Ireland whatsoever. And then over in the UK, you had the British monarchy, and then you also had the Normans, and the Normans kind of came out of France, but they were kind of on the edge of, they had a relationship with the crown, but the crown was always wary of Normans, in case they'd want to usurp or overthrow them. So we had Diarmid MacMurrough, was a High King of Ireland, who said to himself, if I get the Norman lads over here, I can use the Normans kind of to gain more influence around Ireland. So he married his daughter Aoife to a man by the name of Strongbow. Strongbow was a very famous Norman leader. And Strongbow comes over.
That's what the cider is named after.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very, very shite cider, but it's it has a purpose. It's cheap. You can buy it by the 3-liter bottle, so it's perfect. So Strongbow gets married to Aoife. By all accounts, I think Strongbow was a pretty good guy. He's a good leader, but the King of England at the time saw the Normans coming over to Ireland and was worried. He was worried that they would spread across Ireland and then they would invade and usurp the king. So what he did is he used the growing Normans in Ireland as an excuse to invade Ireland and start taking the land. Mm-hmm. So this is all around, I think, the 1000 AD or so. Let's see. Yeah, it's about 1171 was when King Henry invaded Ireland. So then kind of the Normans and the English are in Ireland. They're spreading over, kind of taking over their influence. We have Norman castles all over Ireland, these beautiful big square castles that you see everywhere. A lot of them are just gently crumbling away into the fields, so you can go and explore them and stuff. And I feel like in America, they'd be in a museum or something, or, you'd pay a ticket and go see them. So I spent a lot of my youth climbing castles in Ireland.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to fast forward a little bit. So let's say maybe 1500s. So the English now have control of the entire island of Ireland, take whatever you want when I say the English, but the monarchy or the crown or whatever. And they have issues with the native Irish, where the native Irish, I don't know, is it that they're fighting back, or it's not this pacification that they thought it was going to be. So what they start to do is what we would call plantations. So they say to people over on Great Britain, like, if you come over here and you bring 30 people with you, we will give you land, we will give you some money, and you can establish a colony of sorts in Ireland. So the vast majority of these plantations were unsuccessful. And especially when the plantations came over and they said to the native Irish people, well, where do we go? Well, this is our land. What are you doing? They were like, well, the famous quote from Cromwell is, you can go to hell or you can go to Connacht. Connacht is the region on the west coast of Ireland, and it's beautiful for tourism. But around this time, when the only thing that mattered was arable, fertile land, it was the worst place in the world to go. It's terrible. So a lot of the plantations were very unsuccessful, but in Northern Ireland, it would be what's known as the Cromwellian plantation, where primarily Scottish settlers I think they were moved off their land. I think there's some relationship to what's called the Highland Clearance, but I'm not too sure. But primarily Scottish Protestants came over and settled in the land in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland land it's like the breadbasket of, well, Ireland, I guess. It's really, really high quality land. It's really good for farming. They weren't allowed to hire Irish people. And they also, they had to, anyone who wanted to settle in Northern Ireland had to bring over 30 people. So it's planting. They're implanting their influence.
Yes.
So all of the other plantations more or less petered out, but this one was extremely successful. And we're talking late 1500s, I guess, early 1600s, I think. So then you have, like, I don't exactly know what the population demographic back then was, but suddenly you have these settlers who come over, they've established their influence, they've established their religion. The Catholicism religion was, you had to do it out in the bushes or have these secret churches, and they had they'd kill priests. There was like there was a money to be paid for killing wolves and killing priests in Ireland, because they wanted to stamp out the Catholicism religion completely. And they did that, they wanted to stamp out Irishness. So they got rid of our language. They, got rid of our religion. They tried to get our sport gone and all these sort of things. All of these things that make what it is to be an Irish person was deliberately tried to be stamped out to get rid of our sense of Irishness. So we're going to go from the 1600s, we're going to go up to around the 1950s and the 1960s. Okay, it's a big jump. But...
Well, before we get to that, though, what was it, in 1905? Was it Arthur Griffith? Am I correct?
Yeah, Arthur Griffin, yeah.
Was he, this is where the beginning of the true IRA, not the true IRA as a secondary, the IRA, that's where the Irish Republican Army, as we know it historically now, kind of began, correct?
Okay, so...
I don't want to take you away from what you were saying, but...
No, I think it's actually an important point, what I should do then. So hang on, I'm going to bring us to, let's say, 1916 then, and we'll talk about this a little bit.
Okay.
So the entire island of Ireland is under the control of England, under the control of the British. So Ireland has been agitating. We finally got the freedom of religion in the late 1800s, and Ireland went through a savage famine in the 1850s. It was 3 successive years, Black 47. So 1847 was the worst year of all, where our population went from 9 million down to about 2 to 3 million because of death and emigration.
This is why there's more people of Irish heritage in America than there are in Ireland.
Absolutely. 30 million in the US and there's only 6 million in Ireland.
Yes.
So, and then there's a lot of people today who would argue, well, the famine was caused by a blight, which was a disease that started in South America, got over to mainland Europe, and then spread across the spores into Ireland. And it made the potato just rotten. You're digging up your fields and the potatoes are just black tar, basically. And you can still see all over Ireland where the potatoes were everywhere, because the poor Irish people, the one good that, the one food that was like 60-70% of their diet was potato. So when that dies out, and then you still have landlords demanding more money, demanding more stuff, all primarily British landlords, it just created this huge...
I know where you're going to go, because it wasn't just money that they were demanding, was it?
What do you mean?
Well, they also wanted any other crops that were still there.
Well, kind of like...
The British still took any remaining crops outside of potatoes. So
absolutely, yeah. So there's a couple of things. Like we have these things called coffin ships. So when the Irish people left, emaciated and starving, they often went over to Liverpool or over to England before getting on a boat over to the US. But in a lot of cases, these people were starving to death on a boat that was laden with crops that was going to be sold. Yeah. So that was one of the things. The English then tried to set up these things called soup kitchens, or workhouses, where you'd go with your wife and your kids. All of you would be separated, and you would work all day in a place rife with diseases, and just to be getting food at the end. So, and then eventually, after like a year or 2 years, when they were awful places, but they were needed, they were all closed down. And then finally, you also had like Protestant preachers in Ireland who would feed you on the proviso that you change your religion.
Yes.
So we have a term in Ireland called taking the soup, and taking the soup means, oh yeah, that person would take the soup, which means, so yeah, like I said, I'm trying to be a little bit brief. I'm trying to go into a little bit. So, there was this very, very anti-English sentiment that had been growing and growing and growing. And by the time that England was distracted with World War I, there was a push for like, let's get our independence now. Let's stage a rebellion or a rising. So the rising was staged for Easter 1916 in Dublin. Well, it was meant to be all over Ireland, but then word got out to the British that it was happening and it got cancelled. But then the guys in Dublin and girls said, oh, let's do it anyway. So it was a terrible idea. Like there was no hope. It was a very small amount of people versus the might of the British Army. But I think, was it Good Friday? But anyway, it was Good Friday 1916. I think Easter Friday, maybe Easter Monday. I'm not sure. But it was the IRA. They took strategic buildings around Dublin. Pardon?
The Easter Rising.
Yeah, the Easter Rising, exactly. So, one of them stood outside the General Post Office and read the proclamation of the Irish Republic, and we demand blah, 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 blah. They didn't take train stations. They didn't take the docks. So though the Rising was only, I think, 1,000 or 2,000, by the end of the week, the British had brought in 40,000 soldiers. Yeah. So it was doomed from the very start. And eventually, after days of fighting, the people involved were arrested. And the Irish people at the time were like, those idiots, what were they doing? Irish people at the time were poor and just wanted to feed their families. Most of them were super politically motivated. But then the British made probably one of the biggest missteps at the time that they could have possibly done. The 10 leaders, the people who would be considered heroes of Ireland, instead of them being just arrested, they were all executed. They were lined up and shot.
Yeah.
And one of them, James Connolly, was mortally injured. He was drifting in and out of consciousness, covered in bullet holes or whatever. So he was taken by ambulance to Kilmainham jail, and he was lifted out of the ambulance, propped up on a chair, blindfolded, and then executed by the British. And stuff like that still makes my blood boil to think about it. But it was that.
And then you created martyrs for everybody to gather around, because they did that. What they were doing was an impossible, if not heroic, attempt to begin with.
Yeah, right? It was a fool's errand, but at the same time, it galvanized our movement.
It pulled everybody together. Because now they had an umbrella to stand under.
Yeah, so that's where we start to see the two characters, Michael Collins and Eamon de Valera, who were taking part in what became known as the War for Independence. So, basically, I'm going to try and get through it quite quickly, but let's say the English then put a treaty forward. What was the treaty called? I can't remember the name of the treaty, but eventually England came to terms and said, we have a treaty for you. De Valera said to Michael Collins, can you go over and, negotiate this with the British? So Michael Collins goes over, and the terms of the treaty are Ireland will have its own thing. I think it's called Home Rule. So they'll rule themselves, but at the end of the day, they'll just swear an oath of allegiance, and that's it.
Yeah.
And Collins was like, oh, this is a stepping stone to total independence. I can work with this. And I'm not sure about the 6 counties that make up Northern Ireland, but I'll explain that after. But so he signs the treaty. He comes over and De Valera says, "How dare you do that?" You know, he's like, "But it's a stepping stone to independence." De Valera said, "I can't believe you did that." And then Ireland went straight from our war of independence straight into a civil war, pro-treaty versus anti-treaty sides. So people who fought side by side suddenly were killing each other. And the outcome of that anyway, so the pro-treaty side won in the end because they were helped by the British.
And this ended around 1922, correct?
I think 22, 23, 24, I think. But yeah, I think there or thereabouts. And then we ended up getting our total independence by, I think it was 39. This is the time where you want to fact check now my dates because they're a bit wonky. But by the time we got the independence for the Republic of Ireland, in the 6 counties that make up Northern Ireland, the majority population were Protestants who believed that they were English. They didn't believe that they were Irish. So so when Ireland was negotiating, they were like, well, look, we're not Irish citizens. We don't want to be a part of your Ireland or whatever. So what came out of that was the Republic of Ireland was established with 26 counties. And then in the top corner, like Wales, like Scotland, there was now a new country that would encompass the United Kingdom called Northern Ireland. So when I drive up to Northern Ireland, they use British sterling, they use pounds.
Yes.
The road signs change from kilometers to miles. Like it is what makes up one of the United Kingdom places, whatever. And at the time, I think the demographics maybe were 60 or 70% Protestant, 30 or 40% Catholic. Does that all make sense?
Yes, I'm following.
Okay, so I think that was an important sidebar to understand how Ireland as a whole, as an island, is 32 counties, but 6 of those counties would be considered Northern Ireland and are a part of Great Britain or United Kingdom or they're part of United Kingdom, sorry. So then that brings us back to, say, the 50s and 60s. Let's just say the 60s. We have this generational wealth gap that is from the land getting taken off the Irish people in the 1600s. Now that gap still is as prevalent as it ever was. Mm-hmm. So for the sake of this, we'll call them Protestants, I guess, but you could say Protestant or you could say Unionist for people who would align with Great Britain. And then you would say Nationalist or Catholic for people who align with the Republic of Ireland. So you have a situation where the people in Northern Ireland who would consider themselves Catholic or Irish are coming to the realization, which has been galvanized by the Martin Luther King civil rights movement in the US. They're like, wait a second, we're the second-class citizen.
Yes.
And I know that sounds a bit mad, but at the same time, you have to understand that, like, the Protestants, everything in Northern Ireland was biased in the favor of the Protestant population at the time. So I'm talking like, if you wanted a good job at like Harland and Wolff, the shipyard that built the Titanic, all Protestants. If you walk in and say you're a Catholic, they won't even look at your CV. If you wanted a job for any sort of government job, police, anything, all Protestants. No, very few Catholics could get in. I think the police in RUC, I think it was 10%, 20% Catholics. Very, very low. And even the laws, in the city of Derry, which is a very nationalist Irish city, to prevent any nationalist or Irish person getting into like a government place or a situation, the boundaries were changed in 1936. It's called gerrymandering. So the boundaries were split up in such a way. Yeah, so that you have all of these Catholics who would get someone elected to the council. Suddenly everything is split up. So suddenly they're all the Catholic minority and Protestant majority.
Yeah.
As well as that, you only vote for council elections if you pay rates. Landlords pay rates. And if landlords have multiple houses, they get multiple votes.
Yes.
Most Catholics didn't own their own houses. They didn't get pay rate. So it was what's called a unionist country for a unionist people. Everything in this sense was designed to prevent the Catholics from ever having kind of a step up in any way. So, yeah, that's a pretty, I'm trying to think, did I leave anything out for kind of, Northern Ireland was a 2-tier system for a long time. And with the introduction of free education, with the introduction of the civil rights movement in the US, the Catholic population said, we've had enough. We demand to be treated the same. Oh, the university. Derry City is a city that really needed a university. And instead it went to the small town called Coleraine instead. So you have the University of Coleraine that exists there because that's a Protestant place. It's a Protestant.
Yes.
Derry was a Catholic majority and they didn't want to do anything that kind of helped the Catholic population. So anyway, there's a lot more digging into that. I'm pretty sure I did that fairly well, without making any massive flubs. But then you have kind of the start of the civil rights.
This now, again, we can go back hundreds of years, okay? Literally, whatever we decided, 850 years of subjugation of the Irish by the English, okay? Culminating in Northern Ireland becoming its own country. And although it was overwhelmingly Protestant, there was still a very large Catholic minority.
Exactly.
Right?
And to be honest,
these people now were basically not allowed to breathe. They couldn't have jobs. They couldn't have work. They couldn't have school. They had schools, but they didn't have the good schools.
Everything was segregated. Yeah.
Everything. Absolutely everything.
More or less, yeah.
And so now we're going to kind of fast forward to 1968, 1969, the end of this.
But also, Protestants were only having 1 or 2 kids, and the Catholics were having 5 to 10 kids.
Yes.
So it was only a matter of time before the demographics would drastically shift.
Yes.
Which they did only recently, only 2 years ago or 1 year ago. The Catholic made up the majority over the Protestant. So
well, that's for all of Northern Ireland, but many of these cities like Belfast or Derry, Londonderry, which is Derry, these cities were already majority Catholic, were they not?
I don't know about Belfast, but I know Derry was a majority Catholic city. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm not too sure. Belfast is so big.
Of course, these were our hot spots as far as the Troubles began, because they were, again, a large portion of Catholics who were being treated very, very unfairly.
Yeah, and at this stage, if you're looking for the IRA didn't really exist in any form at this stage. Yes. They did a border campaign where they bombed a couple of police, police house? Where the police people? Garrisons, I guess? Or not even garrisons.
Barracks.
Just police stations. They bombed a bunch of border police stations. But the public support wasn't behind them, and they weren't very successful, and they just kind of petered out. This is the 50s, I think. Was it early 60s? 50s, definitely. Because the support wasn't behind them, so they kind of disappeared again. Mm-hmm. But they come back very soon. So let's get to maybe 1968. And you have all of these different social movements that are coming up. Lots of different, the most famous one is called NICRA, N-I-C-R-A, Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. And these are, we're going to start, they would sing, "We Shall Overcome." They're doing the same stuff you saw in the US.
Yes.
And there were lots of other ones. There were some that were totally socialist based. So they were Protestants and Catholics who just wanted to, free the working class. Yeah. But they didn't stick around too long. A lot of these ones were primarily Catholic agitating for civil rights. So the police force, the RUC, primarily Protestants, you'd kind of say they didn't really react very well to these protests. Now, did they beat the crap out of the Catholics? Yes, in some cases. But in other cases, they just kind of stood back, and you had what would be called a loyalist would come in. So here's where I'm going to introduce loyalists and Republicans, because there's a difference.
Yes.
A unionist is someone who believes in the union with Great Britain and Northern Ireland and blah, blah, blah. And the nationalist wants a relationship with the Republic of Ireland. But a loyalist is someone who believes in the crown, but is willing to kind of use violence to get that across their means. Mm-hmm. And a Republican is someone who believes in Ireland and is willing to use violence to kind of get that across. So the RUC would be watching these protests happen, but then at the same time, B specials and loyalists would start attacking these people, throwing stones, breaking bones, smacking them with batons. And the RUC doesn't do anything about it.
Yes.
They just kind of sit back and kind of watch it. And
let me stop you just for 1 second, because again, remember we're talking to predominantly Americans here, all right? And I know as we go on with this, we're going to have so many initials, okay?
Yeah, I know. Oh my God, it's such a
the IRA, who is the Irish Republican Army, but there are many, many splinter groups within the IRA, okay? And then when it comes to the loyalists, there are, there's the two big ones, UVF and the UDA, but there's a dozen smaller groups that we could talk to.
Yeah, I sometimes equate it.
They all show up with these 3-letter initials that if you're reading it or hearing it, you can really get lost.
I sometimes equate the loyalists with the churches in the US, kind of you kind of follow the person who sets it up, you know, and then with their slight kind of interpretation of it. It's kind of the loyalists were, they did loads of them.
Oh, tons and tons of them. But so what you're talking about basically now are the police who
Or you see are the Royal Ulster Constabulary, the police force, yes.
And what they did was, when this violence was going on, if the violence was, well, it was always Catholics and Protestants against each other, they would allow the Protestants to carry out the violence with a hands-off approach.
Well, it's a term I'm not really great with them, but they're called the B specials, and they would be a quasi force, kind of in the middle of quasi-military force is how they're described. Mm-hmm. But so they'd come along and they'd be like, oh, the Catholics are marching again, we'll beat the crap out of them.
Yes.
So, that happened a number of different times where you had, the RUC either standing by or taking part, smacking people with batons at a very famous march in 1968. And this is where people were screaming, going, where is the IRA? Where is the IRA? Like, why aren't they here to protect us Catholics peacefully marching, getting attacked? The IRA at this time were very kind of socialist, left-leaning, and there was a large proportion of them that didn't really want to take part in this violence. They didn't really want to kind of jump in and like this sort of stuff. But there was a lot of other people. We call it hawks and doves. The ones that were not really looking for violence and the ones that were. And things came to a head. I think it was 1970, maybe it was 1969. But things came to a head when the leadership in the IRA split. So we have the original guys, left-leaning, who kind of fizzle out, called the officials. And then we have the new guys who came onto the playground, called the provisional IRA. Yeah. And the provisional, they only called themselves that. They were like, we'll just call ourselves this until we can think of another name. This is the provisional name. And it stuck. So, the provisionals were the ones who came out and they said, we're taking the fight back to them.
Yes.
So,
and the provisional IRA is the IRA that when I say we again, most Americans think of when we think of the IRA.
100%, yeah.
They don't think of the original true IRA,
the officials,
which created the Republic of Ireland. Okay?
Well, there only was one, really. IRB and all this stuff, but there really only was one, and then this was kind of the most significant splinter, I guess, at the time.
Yes.
So let's say I'm missing some stuff, but let me think about this. So we have like I'm just finishing an episode of Martin McGuinness. We have a young Martin McGuinness now who's taking part in these. Initially, as a young teenager, he's throwing stones. He's throwing, as the RUC come into their areas, they're throwing stones, they're throwing sticks. And then you have like what's called the Battle of the Bogside, which they believe that the RUC was going to invade Derry and invade the Bogside. The Bogside is a part of Derry that is, it's all Catholics. And these were where the young kind of militant, I guess, these teenagers, 15, 16, 17, were coming up and saying, we have to do something about this. We have to take the fight to them, blah, blah, blah.
Sure, they've had enough.
Exactly. So then that brings us to, I don't want to get this date wrong. Give me 1 second. There's some dates you just cannot get wrong. But let's see. Oh, well, actually, no, I should go back a little bit further. Okay, so for the Battle of the Bogside, which I'm pretty sure was 1969, the RUC just made they made a balls of the whole thing. Like, as in, they were ill-equipped. There was no relief system in place. So the officers that were working there were there for 3 or 4 days in a row without any time off.
Yes.
People were throwing petrol bombs at them from the high-rise buildings in Derry, and they were ill-equipped to deal with that as well. Their shields were tiny, the riot shields. So as a result of the Battle of the Bogside, the people in the Bogside ended up like putting barricades all over the streets and painting on the wall, "You are now entering free Derry." Yes. So that you can still see kind of where that was painted, and they change it every year. But free Derry became a place where the IRA, who had been kind of coming up at this stage, I don't know how they split, would walk around freely with guns. They were giving speeding fines. They were taking the law into their own hands. So this was a very big embarrassment for the Northern Irish political system at the time, which essentially said, we need help. And they asked the British, can you send soldiers in? And I'm pretty sure the Parliament was dissolved, or I don't know was it this time, but basically direct rule went back to Britain. And the Northern Irish Parliament was dissolved. And then Britain deployed soldiers into Northern Ireland. And when the soldiers came in, the Irish Catholic people, the Northern Irish Catholic people were like, oh, brilliant, the soldiers are here. They're going to protect us from the biased police force.
Yes.
And then the soldiers started, shooting people. Is the only way to put it. Sorry, I'm laughing about that, but the only way to put it is the soldiers started doing things time and time again.
Well, no, I know I've seen many times how, again, the Catholics welcomed the British soldiers at first.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, a lot of Catholic women, like, they saw they saw local Derry boys or teenagers, and they were like, they're unemployed, they're on the dole, they're in the IRA. A lot of them started going out and marrying soldiers.
Yeah.
Until the IRA started tarring and feathering and shaving the hair of women who did that.
Right.
So the IRA, they were pretty no nonsense in how they wanted to prevent any sort of fraternization, I guess, the way to phrase it.
Yeah.
So the soldiers' reputation had already been taken a bit of a hit. And then you have the day that's known as Bloody Sunday. So Bloody Sunday was the January the 30th, 1972.
And I don't want to cut you off, but Bloody Sunday followed, if I'm not mistaken, the Ballymurphy incident, correct?
The Ballymurphy massacre. I'm not too sure. I think you're probably right.
I think I am, which of course made people that much more upset,
Let's have a look. The Ballymurphy massacre. Yeah, but it's kind of sad. Like, it's sad that things have to be put into this sort of Ballymurphy massacre, because this was a series of killings that happened between the 9th and the 11th. Mm-hmm. But then, there were so many sporadic killings happening that these ones got grouped into this one, the Ballymurphy massacre in Belfast. But Bloody Sunday was weird because, like, say, in the lead up to it, in like the 6 months before it, the IRA are a bit better established. The sign-ups have been increasing. 2 children have been killed in Derry in the Bogside over a period of 4 or 5 months. They were hit by trucks. Anyway, they were hit by army vehicles that just sped off. They killed a 3-year-old child and I think like a 10-year-old child.
Yeah.
And there was this real fiery atmosphere where the people of Derry were pissed off. They were really angry. A lot of them that were in paramilitary groups or in the IRA at the time they wanted to kill soldiers, and they had been killing soldiers by this stage. Yeah. So, but does that answer the question at all, or was I just did I go all over the place?
Oh no, I didn't know if I had a question. Oh, okay. I just wanted to say, in my remembrance, that the Ballymurphy incident was almost like the beginning of the fuse being lit that led to Bloody Sunday. Because it was the British Paras both times, correct?
Yeah, but I think it's what you're saying I think is totally correct. But what I'm saying is
lighting the fuse had been lit for years.
Yeah, with the Battle of the Bogside and the establishment of Free Derry. Free Derry was a spit in the face for the forces trying to control the area as well. It was an embarrassment. But with the fuse lit, Bloody Sunday happens, and we have this peaceful protest where the original plan for the protesters was to march. It was told, you're not allowed to protest, this is illegal, blah, blah, blah. And then you have the protesters being kind of cordoned off by the army. Now, the IRA had planned, I only found this quite recently, Martin McGuinness had planned to enact some sort of nail bomb attack, but he called it off shortly before. Speculation versus what happened is very hard to tell, but all we know is that somewhere along the lines, a gun was fired, and then the British paratroopers fired.
Yes.
And then that gun being fired caused the paratroopers to fire more. Now, whether the gun came from them or not, it's unclear. And also the unit that were sent in they're trained for. The argument is that this is the paratroopers, which are trained for like intense war campaigns or whatever. It's argued that they shouldn't have been sent in there because they're a little bit more violent than your average soldier. I don't know how to phrase that better, but
now as both an ex-paratrooper myself, albeit an American, and an ex-police officer as well, these are 2 very different jobs. Okay, and I think a problem that had happened in Ireland, going all the way back to the Black and Tans, okay, is that you're sending soldiers in to do police work, and they're ill-equipped. Not because you need to be more armed or more dangerous. You need to maybe what is the word I want to use? You actually should take a lighter hand when trying to convince people to do things. You absolutely need force, but you do not need to necessarily be deadly force.
It was very difficult to do as well. It was hard for them because at the same time, a lot of these protests would end with youths like lobbing stones, lobbing stuff at them. There was always a section of these peaceful protesters that would break away and start throwing rocks, throwing stones. And this was when the army opened fire, basically opened fire on. There was a couple of different incidents of where it happened, but in the heel of the hunt, like 14 people were killed. 13 on the day or the day after, and then eventually 14. But, so they're like, okay, well, did they kill a bunch of IRA terrorists? No, none of these people were. Most of them were shot in the back as they're running away. Some of them were shot as they were administering aid to people who were injured. So suddenly you have, I'm pretty sure the age split is like between 15 and 25. Young men, all killed, and there was no causality in it. This was just the British Army lost control. They call it loss of gun discipline or something in the report. But then, then you have in the House of Commons the next day in England, they're like, oh, well, the terrorists got what was coming to them, or, this awful, awful language. So we had Bernadette Devlin, who was this young woman who was an MP at the time. She walked up and slapped him in the face, the guy who said it. It was a brilliant moment. And then there was a whitewash inquiry a couple of weeks or months later, which said, oh, yeah, well, it was probably caused by that. So everything, in the House of Commons, it was disrespected. And then the inquiry was a total propaganda piece that absolved the soldiers of any wrongdoing when, these soldiers executed young men who were doing nothing. In this case, who were doing nothing to deserve getting killed. And that was probably
with numbers like this too, with numbers like this, where you're talking about, well, it was like 24 or 26 people shot and 14 of them passed or died. Yeah. But it's not, there's no accident there. It's not, oh my God, we killed somebody. You killed 24 people. You shot 24 people.
Well, you see, the soldiers heard gunshots and thought that they were getting shot at, which wasn't the case. Right. Nobody was shooting at them. So they heard their own gunshots and then used that as an excuse to continue shooting in their heads.
Well, and shot people who were not armed.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody was armed. There was one story about one of the boys being found with a nail bomb in his pocket, but there was speculation something was planted there or something, but there was absolutely no justification for the shootings. That's the most important point to drive home. Yes. They weren't provoked in any way. And this Bloody Sunday led to an absolute explosion in people signing up for the IRA. And Martin McGuinness, who was young and he was smart and he already was in a bit of a leadership role, suddenly he became the head honcho for the Derry IRA.
Sure. And well, just like we said about the 1916 uprising, the Easter uprising, they created martyrs.
Yeah, absolutely.
They sadly created this mess. Yeah. You know what? Yeah. Let's put a pin in it right here. We're going to take a break for 1 second, and we're going to be right back with my friend Oisín Feeney here. Listen up. This one's important. As a rule, I never stump for charities because most of them don't hand out as much money as they collect. And that's a sad fact. But not Tunnel to Towers. These guys do the right thing. They have an A+ rating from Charity Watch and a 4-star rating from Charity Navigator. That's like the #1 charity watchdog group. With over 93% going towards the families of veterans and first responders who have lost their lives in the line of duty. For only $11 a month. And it's easy. Just go to t2t.org. That's letter T, number 2, letter T.org. And hit the donate button. Do the right thing and do good for the families and the veterans and the first responders who do good by you. It's only $11 a month. Thanks, and all the best. All right, everybody, we're back with our friend Oisín Feeney here from the Troubles podcast, and we're just going to continue on with our history lesson here. Oisín, where were we? We just finished up with Bloody Sunday.
Yeah, Bloody Sunday has just occurred. Before that, I hadn't actually said it, but this thing called internment also happened before Bloody Sunday.
Yes.
Which was the British Army's attempts to put an end to the IRA. So they came into Northern Ireland, they dismantled Free Derry, they dismantled other no-go areas in Belfast, and they arrested, I think it was maybe 340 or 350 people. And they're like, that's it, we'll arrest all of the IRA terrorists, the end. But their intel was terrible. Their intel was awful. A lot of the people arrested had nothing to do with the IRA or the IRA of the modern IRA. Maybe they were, political 20 years ago.
Yes.
So internment was another huge thing as well. As well as that, a number of the men were subjected to what's called advanced interrogation techniques, which you and I would probably call torture. It'd be very similar to what happened in Guantanamo Bay in the US.
Absolutely. Yes.
So much so that when the US was sued for its treatment of the prisoners in Guantanamo, their defense was, no. The British did this to the Northern Irish prisoners, and that was ruled as not being torture. So if that was ruled as not being torture, what we're doing is not torture.
Right.
So
now, for our listeners, again, internment, okay, in case anybody's not familiar, they were basically scooping up young men of fighting age who they believed or did not even know could be members of the IRA. But again, young men, healthy, strong, these guys may be a danger. Let's get them off the street with no probable cause, okay, in many cases, and put them in prison.
Yeah, and some of them were there for up to 2 years.
Without committing a single crime. They just scooped them up and stuck them in prison.
So when they got out of prison...
Oh, well, of course. Again, you're creating enemies. You're creating enemies doing this.
Yeah, that's the quote in the latest book I'm reading, where it was like the British strategy. The British invented republicanism in their actions in these cases, in their Bloody Sunday, in internment, and all this sort of stuff. So then you have a massive amount of sign-ups. The IRA is suddenly, the provisional IRA is suddenly like packed to the gills with potential members. The Irish government at this stage, they don't know what to do. They're, after Bloody Sunday, they threatened to send the Irish army into Northern Ireland, but they didn't really want to do it. And they're still they always get a little bit of, they always get criticism that they didn't do enough during the Troubles. But they didn't want to start a war with England via Northern Ireland. But at the same time, the IRA did a lot of training in the Republic of Ireland, and the British could never chase them down here as well. The soldiers couldn't. So it was always a point of contention for the British government that Ireland isn't doing enough to curb it, but they also are like a training ground, where bombs are stored, all this sort of stuff. So anyway, we have the IRA doing pretty well. They've started importing arms from the US. So there was a pretty good relationship between people in the US, sympathetic to the cause of the IRA.
Well, I remember that from my time. I grew up, I am of this age, and I remember NORAD being, in many of the bars in my neighborhood, they would have drives to collect money. All right. There was a bar in the Bronx when I was, I don't know if it was still open when I first got there or not. Okay. When I arrived as a young police officer in the early 90s, all right, that was raided by our police department or the federal, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, or whoever it was, because they had hoarded weapons, including rocket launchers, in the basement of this bar that they were sending over to Ireland.
Oh, you name it. The IRA they were trying to get Stinger missiles at one stage.
All kinds of stuff. And it was a very, very strong connection with America as far as financing the IRA.
Absolutely, yeah. And initially it was car parks. Like car parks in Northern Ireland was, that was the early days of the funding. Then it was bank robberies and heists. Then it was money coming in from the US.
Yes.
And then in the later days, it came from FARC in Colombia in exchange for training rebels down in Colombia. It was cocaine money. And then it was also coming from Libya, from Gaddafi. So it was people who were sympathetic to the IRA cause and didn't like the British, was kind of the, and I'd say above all...
My enemy is your enemy kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, there was, they made the most of what came in. When the sniper rifles came in, they became pretty ferocious at sniping British soldiers. And it became, there were some parts of Northern Ireland where soldiers couldn't even walk. Bandit country, South Armagh, they'd have to fly everywhere because for risk of car bombs and for risk of sniping attacks. So at this stage now, the IRA was also pioneering their bombing attacks, their car bombs. Is it Daithí O'Connell? I think it's Daithí O'Connell who's credited with the invention of the car bomb, which is a strange thing you need to invent. But the IRA had, in the early days, pretty good access to bombs from the Republic of Ireland, quarries, and they could steal gelignite from quarries and then use that to make their bombs. In later years, it was all of their bombs kind of were Semtex based, which came from Libya. But in the early days, it was gelignite bombs were the big kind of thing. And, the IRA started showing their ferocity by planting just massive bombing campaigns across the infrastructure in Belfast. They just wanted to wreck Belfast in a lot of cases. They wanted to wreck the infrastructure and the economy in Northern Ireland, to bomb the British to the negotiating table, which didn't really, wasn't super successful. Their Bloody Friday was probably their most violent day, which saw them detonating, I think it was 20 bombs over a 2-hour period. So people describe being in Belfast and hearing a bomb and running somewhere else and another bomb, and it was terrifying. Absolutely terrifying.
Was that in 1972?
Bloody Friday was in 1974. Let me have a look here and just double check. I should have a big list of these, but anyway. 1972. Yeah. Oh, you're right, Jet. So July 21st, 1972. So Bloody Friday would have been kind of.
I know 1972. The reason I can remember that particular date because that is the bloodiest or worst year in the history of the Troubles.
Yeah, I think it was 480 people were killed that
480 year. 480 people. What was it? 260 something Republicans. 100 and something loyalists, and I don't know. I think it was 80 or less actual British people were killed at that time. But it was a rough year.
Yeah, it was tough going, and the IRA were getting stronger, I guess, getting better at how they were operating. And of course, the IRA were taking the fight to British soldiers, but then they widened the net. Then they widened the net to targeting the RUC, to targeting the UDR, Ulster Defence Regiment, which had been a local soldiers, but they're all encompassed Northern Irish people. And then eventually it was civilians who were working with them. If you're fixing a British soldier's car, if you're working as a chef on a British Army base, then that's all legitimate targets in the eyes of the IRA. And as we have the rise of the provisional IRA, then we have the rise of the loyalist paramilitary groups. The Ulster Volunteer Force, the UVF, which were small. They were very similar to the provisional IRA. They were small and tight. And then there was the Ulster Defence Association, which was massive. We're talking like membership differences. One is 40,000, one could be like 2,000, 3,000. So there's a huge difference. But both carried out savage attacks that were often in retribution, retaliatory attacks. The IRA sets off a car bomb and the car bomb kills 10 people. The UVF will say, we're going to kill 10 Catholics tomorrow. And that tit for tat killing happened very, very frequent. Well, that was what the whole Troubles were, basically.
Well, and there were so many, again, as we had just mentioned a little while ago, so many splinter organizations, too, who were quite often just, literally a gang of, 5 or 10 people that got together in whatever town they were in. And now you had over a dozen different organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And it did happen on the Republican side, but the main split for the Republicans was the invention of the INLA, the Irish Nationalist Liberties. Oh, I forgot the L is. But anyway, the INLA were a socialist kind of.
Yeah, they were the more Marxist group.
More Marxist, but pretty effective in their attacks. They got some pretty big.
Correct me if I'm wrong. They didn't last quite as long as and I could be completely mistaken there, but they didn't last quite as long or were as strong a force as the Provos were.
They weren't as strong a force, but they carried out some pretty devastating attacks. That's the only way to phrase it. They got some pretty good assassinations for political characters, and they also took out Billy Wright as well, the leader. Billy Wright, what was he the leader of? He was the LVF, the Loyalist Volunteer Force. So that's another splinter group on the other side.
There were so many, exactly.
Yeah.
What was it?
So,
let me see if I can get this right. He was a poet, Brendan Behan, Behan, who said the first order of business, and I'm paraphrasing, I know I'm not going to get this right, but the first order of business for any Irish organization is the split.
I haven't heard that before, but
in other words, we have to do these 10 things, and the first thing we're going to do is splinter into smaller groups, and so obviously there was a bit of satire in there, but it's not far from the truth.
Yeah, no, it's not far off at all. Like, so we have during the 70s, the IRA are taking the civilian toll is huge. Yeah. They're killing a lot of civilians to get to the targets that they want to get to, and it's hard to describe. The provisional IRA did car bombs that killed civilians. The Loyalists did as well, and the UVF did as well. But the UVF did things that were a little bit different, where you'd see them. Okay, well let's go with the Shankill Butchers. The Shankill Butchers are a notorious group of Loyalists who would often, one of them worked in a butcher's and he had access to, sorry, do you want to ask a question?
No, I was just going to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, are they not, I know they were a gang, but are they not considered the worst Irish serial killers of all time?
Right? Yeah, I guess they'd hate to be called Irish, but I guess you could put it into that category.
Again, from where we're sitting, we're talking about the nation of Ireland as a whole, correct? Yes.
I think you're correct there. But I'm not too savvy on that. But But they're kind of the way they would operate is they would get in one of those big black taxis. They would drive around Catholic areas at nighttime and they'd look for like lone men on the way home from the pub, and they'd pick them up and just violently kill them with butcher tools or butcher utensils, and then dump the body somewhere.
Yeah.
And usually this would come after a Protestant Catholic was killed the day before. The IRA didn't necessarily operate like that. The Shankill butchers were very unique in how they operated and what they did. But I think they were spearheaded by Lenny Murphy. I think Lenny Murphy was the main guy. But eventually, like they were so violent and so bloody that when a lot of them got arrested, I think Lenny Murphy was released and he wanted to set them up again. It's believed that loyalists leaked his information to the IRA, and they said, "Look, he's one of ours, but he's mental. You got to take him out." So he was then kind of killed when he was visiting his girlfriend.
Do you believe that, or is the belief in general that while the Shankill butchers were doing this, that the police were turning a blind eye?
Hard to get a good answer on that. Because of all the killings, it's very hard to know, on a case-by-case basis. And I'm a bit rusty on the Shankill butcher, so I'm not too savvy with it. But let's say, yeah, well, who did I do the latest episode on? What was the name of the... Oh, yeah. So the latest episode, or one of the recent episodes I did, it's called the Glenanne Gang. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the Glenanne Gang would be...
I listened to it.
So yeah, it was dense, and I'm not sure if I like it because I did it a bit all over the place. But it's hard to really convey who these guys were and how they operated. But in reality, they would have been a collection of police officers, British soldiers, well, not British, Northern Irish soldiers in the British Army, I guess.
Yes.
And loyalists who worked together to carry out killings. So I'm not too sure if the Shankill butchers were, because again, they were kind of a different cup of tea, but the Glenanne gang would have definitely, we can confirm, we know this, that there were police officers and soldiers taking part. Yeah. And taking part could be just like, let this car through. Hey, this car is full of loyalist gunmen. Let this car pass. In another case, in one of the stories in the Glenanne gang, there was definitely one police officer who firebombed the place or set off a bomb at a pub. And he was then back in the station interviewing witnesses for the bombing. So you have all of this sort of stuff, which is just crazy.
Wild stories, yes.
Yeah, it's very, again, we're a little bit sporadic with this because it's a bit all over the place, but it's hard to really convey. The IRA were inflicting absolute terror around Northern Ireland in the 1970s with their car bomb attacks. The Loyalists were then also doing the same thing. They were carrying out awful attacks and retaliatory attacks. And all of these splinter groups were doing the same thing. So there was various attempts to make peace, to make this stop, but it wasn't really getting anywhere. It wasn't really going anywhere. And then we have, then Margaret Thatcher comes into foray. She's the Prime Minister of England, and they called her the Iron Lady.
Yes. And
she would be kind of known as, she was like, the IRA guys, when they carried out attacks or killings and they were sent to prison, they were like, I'm not a prisoner. I didn't commit a crime. I committed a political act. Yes. I'm a political prisoner. I'm not a criminal. And Thatcher came in and she's like, this is bullshit. They're all the same. You guys are all criminals. Crime is crime is crime. So before she came in, the prisoners had what was called special category status in prison, which allowed them the ability to receive packages, not do prison work, and wear their own clothes. Thatcher came in and said, this is all gone. Get rid of this. So this now this is me starting in 77, 78. Is this okay with you? Is where we're going?
Sure. No, yeah, go ahead.
So then you have the Republican prisoners start to do varying degrees of protests that would get us up to what's known as the hunger strikes. So initially they went on the blanket. They wouldn't wear any clothes. They wore their blankets. Then there was the no wash protests. They didn't wash. I talked to a guy who he visited his wife. His wife visited him in prison and he had to pass her a message, which is through a kiss. And he said, the poor thing, because she kissed him and he probably hadn't brushed his teeth in 2 years.
Yeah.
So there was the on the blanket, then the no wash protests. Then it kind of took a really different turn called with the dirty protests, where they started smearing their
feces
all over the walls of the cells and stuff. And it was awful. I've heard a couple of different accounts of people living and it was just absolutely awful. And it was being met, the army, the prison wardens and the people who worked in the prisons were starting to get more and more violent with these men. and the men were kind of saying, initially, women did take part in the dirty protests in the early days, but not so much on a smaller scale. And then it all kind of culminated in the first hunger strike, which a number of Republican prisoners decided to refuse food until they were granted this status again. They wanted the special category status back. That's why all the protests happened. Sean McKenna, I think, was one of the guys who went on hunger strike. Eventually, I don't know exactly how this part banged out, but they got kind of a deal that was like, okay, it's looking like we're going to get this deal across the line. They're going to let us wear our own clothes. And also Sean McKenna had gone into a coma. Because when you go on hunger strike, I think you last on average about 50 days, maybe, or 45, before you lapse into a coma. And then in theory, your family could medically intervene and save you. Or, well, we'll learn later that might not have happened. So I think he made a promise, the Dark, Brendan Hughes, made a promise, look, you're not going to die to this. So with the idea that there was an offer coming from the British and try to save the life of his friend, they called off the hunger strike. And then the offer came through and it was like, oh yeah, you can wear your own clothes that are prison issued slacks or something. It wasn't, they were hoodwinked basically.
Yeah.
So then they kind of said, right, Arash and style Cookris back on the hunger strike in the Irish language, because the prisoners in the prisons talked in Irish. So the British soldiers wouldn't know what they were saying, or the British wardens, or the Northern Irish police wardens, or there's so many words. And this one was a little bit different. So this one saw like the likes of Bobby Sands. He'd be a very famous name. He was kind of I think he was the OC at the time, but he said he would go on hunger strike first. And then instead of them all going on hunger strike at the same time, because then the crisis moment happens at the same time. If 10 guys go on, crisis moment is they're about to die. What's happening here? So they staggered the hunger strikes. Every striker would go on after a week or 2 weeks after the first guy did. So yeah, this is a pretty big one. Like again, it's PR. The IRA was very careful. They were outside IRA and inside the prison was always a little bit conflicted. But also they didn't want any people who had killed a lot of people to go on hunger strike. Any of the strikers who went on hunger strike had to have a fairly squeaky clean past. And they always kind of say Bobby Sands, because the deal had broken down, they kind of knew that like this one, like we're going to take this to the very, very end. So that's why Bobby Sands is kind of revered as a bit of a not a folk hero, but just an Irish hero, because the belief is there. He knew he was the first guy to go on strike. So he I'm sure he didn't want to die, but he knew that he would be the one who would die first. If the British didn't give in to the demands of the
Wasn't he also, I mean, again, he made himself into a great martyr, but was he not also, and I might be getting my names mixed up, but I don't think so, voted into political office while he was in prison?
That's just where I was going to go with that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to jump ahead of you.
No, because for me, this is one of the seminal moments of the Troubles. I think it's super important. So, yeah, we have the prisoners who are kind of on hunger strike. And, Margaret Thatcher saying, I'm not backing down. You guys, like, in her head, the first strike failed. This one is going to fail. She was like, oh, the terrorists are starving themselves to death. Whereas, that's what she would say. And then on the other side, it was like, how the British government is letting these men die. And it was a huge kind of back and forth. But I don't think it had fully captured the hearts of the world the way the IRA kind of wanted it to do. And then you have this MP, I think his name was Frank Maguire, who died. And suddenly there was a position for to be elected into Parliament. And the weird thing is, if you're elected into Parliament, that's over in Westminster. You sit down in the hall where you see all those, TV shows and stuff. Now, if you were elected and you're Irish, they usually wouldn't sit there as a protest. They'd be elected official in Northern Ireland, but they wouldn't sit. So the IRA had the idea, Jesus, guys, will we run Bobby Sands? This is his constituency. And imagine if he got elected while on hunger strike as essentially an MP for Northern Ireland, a British MP or whatever. So this was kind of a big operation because they would, we have Sinn Féin here putting Bobby Sands forward, I'm pretty sure. But then you also there was peaceful nationalist parties in Northern Ireland, the SDLP, and they were trying to accomplish what the IRA was trying to accomplish via a peaceful means. They hated, did they hate the IRA? I don't know. But they hated violence. They said, we can get Irish people a united Ireland peacefully. So when Bobby Sands is running, the Sinn Féin needed to convince the SDLP not to run anyone against them. We don't split the votes. we just need Bobby Sands to get elected. And then they had to go to the people who didn't like the IRA and said, look, I know you don't like us. I know we've done a lot of bombings. Can you lend us your votes just this one time? You don't need to become a Sinn Féin supporter, but just lend us your votes to get Bobby Sands in. And he won. He went up against a unionist guy. It was quite close, maybe within 2,000 votes. Bobby Sands got elected to Parliament. And then suddenly the news of the world was aware that there's a man dying of starvation who has now been elected as a British politician. And everyone thought, oh, this is brilliant. There's no way they're going to let him die. Like, it's too big a deal. But Thatcher was resolute. Thatcher was firm. And then Bobby Sands slipped into a coma. And he was very, very, what's the word? He was very resolute. But he said, like, to his family, when I go into a coma, do not feed me. Because in a coma, they could say, here, let's take him off the strike and we can intravenous feed him and take him off. But he said, you will not do that. You will respect my wishes. So it was a very sad kind of interview of his mom outside the prison. She's like, no, we're not going to, this is what he wants.
They allowed him to die.
Yeah. So Bobby Sands died. And then over a period of 3 months, maybe, 9 other people would follow Bobby Sands and die. So then at the end of it, the families started taking their people off. The strike kind of fizzled out a bit. So was it a failure? Was it a success? I think the hunger strike was the first real kind of knowledge for the IRA that, hang on, guys, we can accomplish our aims politically with Sinn Féin.
Yes.
And it's that famous line of the Armalite and the ballot box. We can try and get United Ireland via violence, or we can try and get it via political machinations or whatever. So, and I think overall, like, it was a big, the hunger strikes galvanized people a lot, and I think they became heroes. There's a pub I walk by, every time I go out for a walk, there's a pub called the Owl Triangle, and there's a huge memorial to the hunger strikers. They showed us how they were strong, and they showed us how, and it's
well, we know the song, so I know
we're better now. They showed us how or something. But so that was kind of the 1982
and back to the martyr thing too, where now we have a hero. The Irish people, the Republicans again, have somebody who's fighting the good fight for them.
Yeah, exactly. And now it was messy. I'm not sure if this is the right time, but like the IRA were not without their own, problems. Like, a lot of them were disillusioned and disaffected, and it was very, very easy for the British to work on their network of spies and agents.
Yes.
Like in some cases, if they wanted a guy, they might slip a letter through his house saying, you've won a free car. And he's like, I didn't enter a competition, but okay. So come and collect the car. And he goes to collect the car, and he's propositioned, hey, a couple of guys in the IRA. Would you mind? We'll give you £100 a month or £100 a week if you just tell us their names, tell us their movements. Some of them were threatened. Hey, we know you've been dodging your taxes. We're going to get you arrested if you don't do this. And some of them, it was nasty. It was very, very nasty. But after a period of time, the provisional IRA was very full of informers and agents, and it became very difficult carrying out any form of attack. So they had to really change around, slim down.
You think that they became possibly too big and allowed too many people in?
Definitely too big and too there. And when was this? Because it was the latest episode I did. Martin McGuinness was the man who kind of helped reshape them. But yeah, they slimmed down drastically, and also they became cell operations. Yes. So you only knew the 5 men in your cell. Yeah. So that meant if you're carrying out an attack, no one can inform on you because they don't know who you are.
Correct.
So, but it was kind of a nasty one. Like, say, if the British made somebody an informer or an agent, and then that person killed somebody, and the British knew about it, it was weird. Like, they would kind of watch your career. If you were just a young man in the IRA, not that relevant, and they would turn you, and then they'd watch you rise up the ranks. They might arrest someone who'd be competing so that you continue rising up the ranks. They wanted to get these guys deep in the IRA, which they did very successfully. But there was one story that always kind of...
I remember learning about him, and he was a particularly bad guy. I just remember him because he had like an Italian last name.
Steak knife, Scappaticci, yeah.
There you go. There you go.
He is. I'll get to him because he's one of the really important cogs, I think, in the Troubles. But I wanted to mention that, like, say, there was one guy who was what was it, like a property guy? He got people houses. That was his job. I forget, not that sounds like illegally. That was his job. And a lot of the IRA guys would get out of prison and they go, oh yeah, talk to, I forget his name. Let's just say Seamus. Talk to Seamus. He'll get you a house. So the British were aware of this and they were like, okay, well, what if we turned him? And then once we turned him, which they did, well, reluctantly, he didn't want to, they threatened him. Then they could bug a house and then he could give the IRA guys a house fully bugged.
Yeah.
So, but like he knew he was in it. Because the second you are classed an informer or a tout, you're executed. Mm-hmm. That's it. There was no space. There was no apology. Once you're even the slightest bit, they will kill you. The IRA will kill you. Mm-hmm. So he knew he was in a tight position. He said, look, I want to get the fuck out of Northern Ireland. I want a life for my wife and my kids. So he applied for a visa to Australia. And the British intervened and told Australia that he has a criminal record and he got denied his visa.
Let him in.
He's stuck in Ireland and he was executed when he was finally found out.
Yeah.
So just things like that where, it was murky. It was very, very murky. So like, if you want, I could, I could talk about Scappaticci if you want.
Whatever you like. Yeah, we're kind of going up the chain here. If he's,
we are.
I just remember him being a particularly, in your own words, messy character.
So if you were labeled, if an operation went bad, if guns got discovered that were hidden, if you get to the operation to carry out a killing or a bombing or whatever, and the police are there, someone knew about it. So the IRA needed an internal security unit who would go around and figure out who is the tout, who is telling on us or whatever. So
and
they hired...
For our listeners now too, a tout is a rat or a snitch.
Yeah, a rat, exactly. So what they did was, they had a group go around. The group became known as the Nutting Squad. And at this time, to nut somebody is a term for shooting them in the head.
Yeah.
So if you got a knock on your door and it was any of these guys, you knew you were in a lot of trouble. You knew it was like guilty until proven innocent. So the guy at the very, very top of the Nutting Squad was a man by the name of Freddie Scappaticci. Ridiculous name, but his dad's an Italian immigrant. Hmm. And Freddie was a very, very, very hard man. He was known as a hard man. And he was a very deeply trusted man within the IRA. And he was the head of the Nutting Squad, the number one guy who was going around to find informers and touts and killing them. And what came out was that, the number one person in the IRA trying to find informers was the biggest informer of them all.
Yes.
He was probably the British Army's best intel agent because of where his position was. So the question remains, did Freddie Scappaticci sit in a room and interrogate a guy who was an agent or an informer as well, and then execute him? Mm-hmm. These questions are very hard to answer. And did the British Army allow that, saying, look, we're just going to let terrorists kill terrorists, we don't care, or the British Intelligence Agency or whatever? Because Freddie Scappaticci was never really found out up until the 90s, and then he lived in England with impunity for a while. Mm-hmm. When you think of it, like, it's a huge, it's such an embarrassment for the IRA that their highest intelligence, anti-intelligence guy was giving everything away, So yeah, Scappaticci is a very complicated, like, we don't know. There was meant to be there's a great podcast called Cover by BBC Sounds that does an 8-part on Scappaticci. And one of the things was, like, they're in subsequent inquiries and stuff, they're trying to find out, was Scappaticci a part of state-sanctioned killing? Did the British allow him to kill to accomplish their means? And at the start of that investigation, the unit where Scappaticci had all the information was burned. Somebody burned the entire office down.
Yeah.
And like, the only people who had access to that were people in the know. This wasn't like so are there skeletons hiding in the closet? Are there things yet to be found out? Yes, to this day.
Oh, absolutely. And this kind of thing goes on all the time in every government, I mean, in Ireland, England, here in the United States, they're constantly up to some kind of shenanigans, all right, that they hide from the people because they're too embarrassed to let it out. They're too ashamed. Absolutely. Or they're complicit and they're afraid of going to jail themselves.
It's mad.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like, I don't know, mid-80s, early 80s, the IRA are armed to the teeth. This relationship with Gaddafi in Libya was very successful. And he was sending tons and tons and tons of ammunition, weapons, bombs, money. He just wanted Ireland to take the fight to England, or to the British, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The IRA has also moved over to London. They're carrying out these huge bombing attacks in London. They felt like, 50 bombs in Belfast is worth one big bomb in the middle of London.
Yeah.
So, and then the loyalists are still carrying out attacks as well. There's all these sort of things happening at this time. And it's a really chaotic time in history, I guess. With the odd attempt at peace. I think the Anglo-Irish Agreement was 1985. And then on the Unionist side, you have Ian Paisley, you have these huge, big, significant figures kind of stoking the flames. Go out, if they come in here, there'll be shots fired across the border. Go out and defend your Britishness, defend it.
Yes.
And Ian Paisley was a man of peace in theory, but at the same time, he did kind of encourage his followers to go, to ramp things up. That's the only way to describe it. It just kept ramping up and up and up and higher.
So, where do we go from here?
Like I've written 80 episodes. There's loads of them. So I could go to 1988.
We haven't made it to the Good Friday Agreement yet, so we have some in between.
Well, what I could do is maybe one of the ones I think would be quite important. That's one of my focuses, important moments, is the kind of a tit for tat killing situation that caused three. Let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna bring us to 1988. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll go to a place called Gibraltar. So Gibraltar is it's a British, I don't know. It's not a country. It's off the coast of Spain. It's a what, say?
No, it's an island off the coast of Spain.
Yeah. Well, no, I think it's connected to Spain, but it belongs to the British anyway. I don't fully understand how. But it's where we have the IRA decides to send a few of its people anyway down there, carry out a bombing on a British military band who play once a week or once a day. They play there. The IRA decides, well, look, let's go the British aren't immune wherever they are in the world. We're going to chase them and we're going to carry out attacks. So they send down these three guys who it appears were probably followed from the very start by the SAS, the Special Armed Services, And the way it works is they pick up the bomb car somewhere in Spain and they drive it into Gibraltar. And then they were doing what you would call is like a dry run, where they're going to put a non-bomb car in this car parking space. And then on the day of the bombing, they're going to put the actual bomb car there and then blow it up from a distance. So, but it appears this entire operation was rattled from the very start. It appears they were followed and waiting for the SAS were waiting for the time to intercept. And I forget what happened, but something happened anyway. And the SAS just shot dead all three of the individuals. They were not near the bomb car. They were not armed, and they were not, they were probably in some way involved in planning the operation at the time, but they were not actively doing it.
Yeah.
So this created this huge kind of furor back in Ireland, called shoot to kill. Is it legitimate that these three people were shot dead? I think two of them were shot in the back when they didn't need to be shot and killed. But the British said, well, look, one of them could have had a detonator in their pocket. One of them could have a gun in their pocket. We don't know. So that's something that comes up quite frequently when Republicans are killed by the British Army. Is it legitimate killing?
Right.
Hard to argue.
I'm not familiar with this story, but did they recover the car bomb?
Yeah, they recovered the car bomb. The car you could tell with the car, the suspension was all the way down and the bomb was not detonated. But the three individuals were killed. Mairead, what's her name? Mairead something, famous woman. But anyway, so this is kind of just to show how the tit for tat cycle of violence goes like this. So the bodies are flown home, and then 3 or 4 or 5 days later, the bodies are being buried in Milltown Cemetery or Milltown Graveyard in Belfast. And it's here where we have this guy known as a freelance loyalist called Michael Stone. He wanted to kill Martin McGuinness. Mm-hmm. So this was probably not sanctioned by anyone, but Michael Stone decided to show up to the graveyard. He had 3 grenades in his pocket, and he had a weird Uzi gun or some strange looking gun. So as one of the bodies is going down into the ground, and you can look at this on YouTube, it exists.
I know exactly what you're talking about, yeah.
So Stone lobs 3 grenades into the mourners. He was hoping they'd all duck down and then he could see Martin McGuinness and try and kill him. But in the chaos, shrapnel, gravestones flying everywhere, whatever, he starts running away, running through the graveyard out towards the motorway. And he turns back and he's firing at the guys. And he kills 2 people, I think. Was it 3 people or 2 people? But then, so we have the Gibraltar 3 get killed. Then 5 days later, we have 2 or 3 people killed. And then we have kind of the population, the nationalist population are on edge. They're like, what is going on? You know, our people are getting killed left, right, and center. So then we have the funeral of the man who was killed in the graveyard about 4 or 5 days later. And this again is all the murky territory because I don't really fully understand. And we don't know. But basically, we have a huge procession, a cortege. And then there was 2 British corporals where it's believed one of them was new, one of them was old, and he was bringing them around Belfast for a drive. That's the story, but it sounded a bit sus to me. But they accidentally drive straight head on towards the mourners down the road. So the mourners see the men, they look suspicious, they crowd around the car, they think they're being attacked again. So the 2 unarmed, not unarmed, but unclothed, what's the word? They're not in uniform anyway.
Yes.
They panic because everyone's crowding around their car and one of the corporals shoots up into the air. Everyone panics, pulls back, and then they just push in. The men are pulled out of a car, they're put into a different car, and kind of with the news crew and the video live broadcast around the world, the men are more or less executed and their bodies are dumped within 10, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then the IRA goes around to the media people and demands their tapes. So they don't want to see this PR image out to the world. They want to. So that was kind of like those 3 things all happened back to back to back. And it was just really shocking, you know, to see some, you know, there's a very famous picture of the priest over the bloody body corpse of the corporal who was just killed, saying a prayer. And it was kind of in my head, it's one of the seminal images of the Troubles. And, you know, and it just, in a lot of cases, there was just always one attack would lead to another attack, And then suddenly 30 years elapsed, 3,500 people dead, you know, and when will this end? How will this end? You know?
And then it did end, but it didn't really. There were still problems. Well, there were still problems afterwards. There's still some small problems today, which we can talk about maybe at a later date. But what culminated or brought this into, and was it 1998, correct? The Good Friday Agreement?
Yeah, well, kind of. Like, basically around, so we just did 1988 there, and we have more bombings, more killings. You know, we've left out loads of them. But
well, we could do an episode just on each individual act, which could, well, that's what you do on
which
your
is
show.
Basically my podcast, yeah.
And that's what people got to do, is start listening to your show to get get in deep with all of these characters.
So, like, let's say we have the 90s are coming in. The IRA are armed to the teeth by the 90s. They have more ammunition, guns, heavy machine guns, sniper rifles, Semtex bombs. They have it all, you know? But also now you're looking at a time where these people who are in the IRA are having grandchildren.
Yes.
And a lot of them are like, do we want our grandkids to grow up in a police state and an army state with British soldiers walking by everywhere? You know, I think people were just sick of it. It doesn't pay to be a Republican. If you're in a loyalist group or a Republican group, you're not going to make any money. You're not going to make a living. You're going to be a pauper for your whole life. So I'm trying to think, was there one specific driving force for peace? You know, well, the Irish government was talking to the English government. The Northern Irish government was a bit all over the place, but trying to kind of work it out. And I think it was Bill Clinton then came into, he got elected and he said, we're going to try and figure this out. So
I remember those meetings.
Yeah, so I'm not too savvy on them, but let's say, maybe it's called the Downing Street Declaration. I don't know when this was, 94, I think, or 93. But it was when England and Ireland talked, and England said, okay, we recognise that Northern Ireland has the autonomy to decide if it wants to be with us or not. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of a big moment, because it was the first time acknowledging, you know, okay, this might be on the cards. This could get somewhere, because the violence wasn't going anywhere. The violence wasn't getting anyone everywhere. It became a war of attrition. It's just this slow slog. Yeah. The IRA were bombing. They were trying to do a scorched earth policies. They were bombing loads of police stations near the border and then trying to prevent them being rebuilt. But at the same time, you know, it wasn't really getting anywhere. There were still a lot of informers. So the Downing Street Declaration then kind of got the thing galvanized a bit. And then, when were the peace talks? There must have been 1994, 95. But then anyway, the peace talks got kicked off. And this was a real mess, because you've got to get so many people to one table. So many people who hate each other, who won't say a word to each other, whose families, friends have been killed by the other side. How do you get them all around a table together? So it took a long time. It took a lot to get it across the line. And in the end, I think Gerry Adams was a part of it. Martin McGuinness was a part of it. David Trimble was a part of it. I'm trying to think of the loyalist side as well. David Irvine, a very fascinating guy. David Irvine is his name. And you had all of these different groups representing the people of violence, but also the political groups that worked to do it. You know, they were along the way who were taking part. So there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of to and froing. The Irish government one of the conditions of the Irish government had to change its constitution, recognizing that Northern Ireland is, I think, a part of the United Kingdom. I forget what they had to do, but the Irish people had to vote on changing the constitution. And then Senator David Mitchell was appointed, this well-known, I guess, American senator who came over and he chaired the talks. And then over a 2-week period, you have Tony Blair from England, Bertie Ahern from Ireland. You have the groups, John Hume from the SDLP. I love John Hume. He's a hero. And honestly, David Trimble and David Irvine were very, very important. David Trimble was from one of the political parties, the Unionist political parties. But the problem is Unionists didn't want peace with these violent thugs. A lot of them did. They wanted the political sphere to be, they didn't want any of those people of violence to take part. And they also really wanted the IRA to admit that they're getting rid of their guns. And the IRA said, no, we're going to keep them just in case. Yes. They're like, well, you can't come to the talks until you decommission your weapons. And the IRA said, well, then we're not going to do the talks. And then the IRA carried out this huge bombing in London, the Canary Wharf bombing, it's called, or the London Docklands bombing. And then they were allowed in. So they actually bombed their way to the negotiating table, which really upset some unionists. So like that's it's a big thing. So eventually the loyalists, there was a group representing all of the loyalist groups. They called the ceasefire. They announced that they're getting rid of their weapons. The IRA called a ceasefire and they said they put their weapons beyond use, but they were very, very reticent to jump, to really commit to it. And it really messed up the talks for a long time. So eventually then it was the crunch time. So it was like a day left and there was still no real resolve. Everyone was no one was happy with the agreement. And I think that means it was a good agreement because it ended up being, it had concessions on all sides. And then you have like the largest unionist party at the moment. So they weren't back then, are called the DUP, spearheaded by Ian Paisley. He left the talks. He disagreed so much that he pulled his party out of the talks and he said, we're not going to take part in this anymore. And he protested outside them. So,
well, if I'm not mistaken, Paisley was very much set in his ways.
He was fire and brimstone. He was
not one to bend.
Lord. Yeah, he believed the Pope was Antichrist and screamed at him. He protested against the Pope. I don't know, how would you call him? I don't know what you'd compare him to in the US, but he was very, in his hometown on a Sunday, they changed the playground. Children do not play on the Lord's Day. Yes. So really kind of fire and brimstone version of Protestantism. So, yeah, let me think about it then. Basically, they got an agreement. So the agreement then had to go to the people of Northern Ireland who would vote on it, yes or no, a referendum. They voted yes. 60%, I think, voted yes. We want peace. And then the Irish government changed its constitution. I'm not sure what the British government did. But somewhere along the lines, anyway, the vote passed. The IRA got pissed off and some of them left and started the real IRA. So that's another split. Because again, you look at these people who were on hunger strike, were 20 years in prison, were all of these things they carried out. They lost their youth. They lost everything. And this peace agreement didn't change anything.
And they do believe in a united Ireland. That's what
exactly. Yeah, but the men of violence, say Martin McGuinness and the like, they do believe in a united Ireland, but they stopped believing in the violent way of doing it. They believed politics would work. So, yeah, I think I'm brushing over a lot of that stuff. I'm not sure if it's super accurate and everything, but overall, I always say the Good Friday Agreement was deeply flawed. It was not a stupid agreement, but it was just some of the stuff in it didn't last the test of time, and it didn't allow for any integration. It let the two sides dig deeper into their own cultures and their own resolves. But above all else, it stopped the killing. It stopped the violence.
Well, and that's arguably the most important part.
Exactly. That's why I say it. So again, I think it's a deeply flawed agreement, but the thousands and thousands and thousands of people killed before it, afterwards it was hundreds of people killed. There were still people killed. And there were still stepping blocks. There were some awful bombings still happened afterwards. But for the most part, the agreement brought an end to 95% of the violence.
Yeah.
And people could start to come back to a regular life.
Which is
start to walk to school without a bomb threat, not have to go shopping and there's a discount on the clothes because the clothes are damaged by bombs,
And again, this is something that was voted on by referendum that 60 or more plus % of the population agreed to.
Exactly. Yeah. And the agreement was that the largest parties on each side, so the largest national party and the largest unionist party, would be hand in hand leading the country. So there'd be the first minister and the deputy first minister. It's the same title, but whoever has the largest party representation would be the same. Right. So yeah, so they were meant to work hand in hand and love each other, and it obviously has been very messy. Yes. And the problem is when they disagree with each other, instead of I don't fully understand why this exists, but when they disagree with each other, the other side can actually collapse the entire government. Mm-hmm. So the government of Northern Ireland has been in operation now for 26 years or something like that. And of that period, 10 years nothing has been happening because of sporadically. So for 3 years there, here and there, for 5 years here and there, but because of disagreements and fights. So and all of this is just, the Northern Irish people are the ones suffering over their stupid little agreements or whatever.
Well, we've made it now, to the end of the Troubles. When I say the Troubles again, the years that are considered the Troubles, although there were problems that continued. And in that time, okay, the violence has ended, but also there is now a Catholic majority in Northern Ireland. Am I mistaken there?
No, you're correct. Yep, the demographics shifted maybe a year ago.
And from what I understand, things that I've read, things that I've watched, the Catholics have done much, much better as far as education and different things where they're living a much, much better life than they were, decades ago.
Yeah, and unionists would say there's an overcorrection now or something. They'd say
an overcorrection, but I'm correct so far that the Catholics are doing better. Do you see in the future, all right, and I know it's all speculation, I'm just asking, do you see that if the Catholics take over politically in Northern Ireland, can you see a one nation of Ireland in the future? Or do you think Northern Ireland will remain its own country even if it is majority Catholic?
I'm pretty sure they have the kind of the majority, even though it's still First Minister, Deputy First Minister. I'm pretty sure they have the majority now. But it's funny, like if you go back 10, 15 years, again, unionists were kind of different. On the unionist side, you were either in politics or you were violent. The two didn't necessarily go well together. Whereas on the nationalist side, the people who did the violence then moved into politics, and the unionist politicians had a very tough time dealing with them. But
Sinn Féin was born of the IRA.
Yeah, kind of. I think they've been around before. I'm not too sure that stuff, but yeah, more or less. But so where am I going with this? Let me think about this. So, whereas you had like the people of violence were then in the leadership positions, now we have two ladies. So we've Michelle O'Neill on the Sinn Féin side is the First Minister of Northern Ireland, and then we've Emma Little Pengelly, who is the Deputy First Minister, the same title for the DUP. But the funny thing is, both of those women, their fathers were paramilitaries. So it's this like stepping down, as time elapses and allows this stuff to fizzle out and become less relevant. Like say, I don't know what exactly the demographics are now, but say if they're 51% nationalist, Catholic or Protestant isn't super relevant anymore because we're not religious anymore. But if 51% are nationalist, 49% are unionist, all of those people, the 51% would probably not, because that's Northern Ireland can now, an election or a referendum can be called. And if the majority vote to reunite or reunification, that can happen. But I don't think the 51% will all vote for it. Some of them like being a part of the United Kingdom. Not everybody is a poetic nationalist. They just want, hey, our health service is better. Hey, our tax system is better. Hey, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So Brexit put a huge spanner in the works for Northern Ireland because Brexit was something that was done in England and kind of ignored all of the unionists in Northern Ireland. They were completely ignored. And that pissed a lot of people off. That really pissed them off. The nationalists kind of sat back and let it happen. So I think if it was to happen, I think it may happen in my lifetime. And I think the only reason it would happen is purely economics. It might be more desirable to be part of Europe than to be a part of the United Kingdom. So I think it'll be a purely economically driven as opposed to a poetically driven. But at the same time, then you have, suddenly you will have a lot of people in Northern Ireland who feel isolated, who feel cut off, who feel torn out of their country, their heritage, and thrown into the Republic of Ireland. Which, well, that's the thing. Sinn Féin aren't saying reunify Sinn Féin nowadays, because Sinn Féin are doing pretty well in Northern Ireland and kind of in the Republic. There was a point I thought they'd get into power, but they're not for a while. But they're now saying a new Ireland will be born. So they're trying to be a bit more inclusive in their wording.
Mm-hmm. Now, are they thinking, or, my next question would be complete autonomy for Northern Ireland, have it be its own country?
Well, I have no idea about that. I have no idea.
Not attached to England and not attached to Ireland.
No, well, the growing...
It certainly has its own character.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the growing political party in Northern Ireland that I like are called Alliance. So Alliance are coloured yellow. They're kind of in the middle, and they're just growing, and they're like, we're not this and we're not that. Because all the other political parties have a tendency to be kind of like, well, that's the thing. Okay, so I do want to explain this, and it's a bit, you have the middle, okay? And then during all of the Troubles and during the Good Friday Agreement, you had the SDLP on one side and the UUP, the Ulster Unionist Party, on the other side. They're moderate. One is moderate nationalist, one is moderate unionist. They're a little bit more kind of open to chat or whatever. Mm-hmm. In the wake of the Good Friday Agreement, both of their power just disappeared or fell off a cliff. And everybody the political stem went out to Sinn Féin on the edge, which are like, Ireland will be free, and out to feckin' the DUP, which are kind of like, our God and our Queen and our country.
Yes.
So their political parties who do not working together. So that's one of those kind of like nasty things that happened after the Good Friday Agreement. So the leading unionist party who's in power now
in America, where we have the far left crazies and the far right crazies. You could think that 80% of the population is reasonable, but you got 10% on one side that's completely out of their mind, and 10% on the other side that's making it more difficult because you're listening to the ones that are on the other side, and they just go back and forth.
But I guess I wouldn't really call them crazies, because they're both very, very successful, very good political parties that have the support and love of loads of people. But it's just the way the demographics kind of shifted, and if from two moderate parties that might have been able to communicate a little bit out to the edges of two parties who just don't like each other.
And they refuse to deal with one another.
Yeah, so nowadays it's good. Like Emma Little Pengali, like she, because everything in Northern Ireland is politicised. Mm-hmm. So when they want to try and build a new Gaelic football pitch, which is our national sport, it's a huge deal, because that's like, you're giving them nationalists like more. They're going to take us over with their sports, or they're all. Well, now you're seeing like Emma Little Pengali would go to a GAA football match, or she'd do like little things that are showing that like cross border or cross community, progress. It's as simple as that. It's progress. And I think it's only going to get better. Now, if the next people come in, have no connection to paramilitary activity, and then they're just there politically. And I think that will be... But Northern Ireland is a tough country. It's a tough economy. The Troubles wrecked it a bit. Britain is paying billions to keep it propped up. Ireland probably doesn't want to pay that money if it comes in. All of our taxes might go up. So Northern Ireland is a hot potato that I think a lot of people don't really want, but don't know what to do with,
Yes.
And then I've read other things now that Britain wants to keep Northern Ireland for like the ports, the strategic importance of its ports or something, but So like I advise anyone interested, just dig in, just look up this stuff. It's all really interesting, and I'm giving a semi-cohesive explanation that's a bit all over the place.
Yeah, again, we painted it with a broad brush today. We really did. But again, that's why we have the Troubles podcast to listen to as far as our history. And what? How about this? Are there any current political Irish podcasts you would recommend?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's called The Irish Passport. I think they do pretty good stuff. Let me have a look and just check to make sure I want to get it the right name. The Irish Passport. Yeah. You'd have to kind of siphon through it, but like, if you go with the Irish Passport podcast and then look through it a bit, and see if you could find some ones related to kind of Northern Ireland. I think they do some really good explainers.
Interesting.
So the Irish Passport is probably what I'd recommend. What else? Who's the Northern Irish person I like? She's a journalist. let's start there anyway. If you want to go into it, check out the Irish Top.
Very good. Well, Oisín, I think we covered a lot today. I'm going to let you go because I know you're getting tired.
I'm hungry more than anything.
But thank you so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. It was nice to meet you. Again, as a fan of your podcast, please, everybody, check out The Troubles. If you have any interest in this stuff, in fact, if you don't have any interest in this stuff, take a listen anyway because it'll turn you on to it. It's a fascinating, fascinating story. All right? And I hope you come back again soon because I'd like to talk to you about everything that's happened since the Good Friday Agreement sometime. All right?
Oh, yeah, it'd be brilliant. Well, thanks a lot for having me on, Travis. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend. It's really nice getting together with you. That's it, my friends. Until next time, all the best. All right. There you go. I really enjoyed this one, and I hope you did too. Please, if you have any more interest in the Troubles of Northern Ireland, give his podcast a watch. That's the Troubles Podcast with Oisín Feeney. And until next time, my friends, please do the right thing. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you all next week. All the best. Listen up. This one's important. I'd like to try to encourage you, please, to give to the Stephen Siller Foundation, Tunnel to Towers, at T2T.org. That's letter T, number 2, letter T.org. Do good for those who've done good for you.